future. Life on our planet is in imminent danger, with extreme weather events all over the world. Dangerous heat and storms that were predicted by scientists are upon us. Those who have taken the responsibility to understand the growing emergency struggle to maintain emotional and mental resilience in the face of overwhelming catastrophes. The future is worrisome, especially for young people trying to get their lives in order in a rapidly changing world. Nature is our refuge, and our greatest responsibility. We all need coping skills and community to move forward so that we can do the necessary work of our time, shifting from being consumers to being caretakers of the ecosystems of our planet. My colleague Paul Beckwith and I are delighted to welcome Eva Jean, the founder and executive director of the Climate Emotional Resilience Institute and licensed psychotherapist, to help us explore possibilities for increasing our coping capacity in the face of the climate emergency. Welcome, Eva.
Thank you so much.
So, Eva, what would you like to tell us about what you're seeing in your practice with people trying to cope with our crisis?
Yeah, as you just said, I play two different roles. So in my private practice, I see a lot of individuals, either climate activists or people who work in government and climate initiative teams, or people just have a lot of feelings in regards to the poly crisis that we're talking about. And what I'm seeing is that oftentimes it's a combination of a lot of different feelings, right? Because normally we don't just have one feeling. So people come in either feeling really sad and have a lot of grief around the changes of the planet, but they don't have a place where they can actually share that with other people. I mean, sometimes what we've seen more often is something called being a climate hostage. So that
Hmm.
means that people they feel really alone in their feelings, and they feel like their grief and their sadness in regards to the climate crisis is not recognized by their immediate environment, by their friends, sometimes even by their family members. So they have to hold it in, and they feel like yeah, and it feels very alone. So what we do, therapy and group spaces, or finding peer groups, or talking to people who also have feelings in regards to climate change, can be really, really helpful to get it out. I mean, Daniel Siegel, who's a neuroscientist and a psychologist, talks a lot about like naming it to tame it is a really good coping mechanism, like acknowledging our feelings so that we can move forward. Because what I see a lot and why people come to me is because they experience a lot of burnout. And they experience a lot of burnout because there's so much urgency, as you all know, right? Like when we engage with this material and read the research, there's so much urgency of how much time we have left. So a lot of activists or scientists or people who work really closely, like on the front lines of climate change, feel like they can't pause. Like there's no time. I can't stop right now and spend time in therapy to figure out my feelings around this. Like I need to continue to work. And yes, there's, I think, a lot of truth in it. But I think what I try to advocate and work with them is, what would it be like sometimes to pause for a moment, to have some sort of coping, so that we don't move into a place of burnout where then we can't do this work anymore at all. I mean, I've seen a lot of people who have to completely stop their work for years because they can't go back to it. It so dysregulates them, and it can activate like major depression and long-term anxiety. And so having these like moments to tap in, to acknowledge, and that doesn't have to be like seeing a therapist. It could also be climate cafes that are popping up, and we can talk more about that right now. But um, and something too
Well,
that
the community aspect of it is so important. You know,
so important.
I'm surrounded by people who are flying to Japan or India or just who are, good, conscious people who just don't want to, recognize that every bit of carbon you put in the air is bringing the crisis closer and closer. And
Yeah.
it's very hard, you want to maintain your friendships but you're living in a bubble kind of, we're surrounded by the lack of understanding of really how serious the crisis is. And that's part of what's so hard about it. You know,
Mhm.
where do you find your community? And for most of us, it's online, you know, with people like the people here at this moment.
Mhm.
And that's where that sense of oh, I'm not alone with this understanding comes in.
And I think, yes, you're so right. And I think there is a lot of support online that we can more easily find. But I also oftentimes encourage people to actually look around. Sometimes we can have this idea that there is no one that understands me, and I feel so isolated. And that feeling itself prevents us also from reaching out and see who actually is in our community. And I know every community is different, but where I live, there is a lot of movement. And the more I'm actually looking towards what's happening locally around me, the more I start seeing, and the more conversations I have, and the more people I say, oh, there is actually some, common ground here, and there is some mutual understanding. Because I think the reality is there are so many people on this planet who so deeply care about this. But I think the way how we operate, I think because of our own feelings or how we focus on this work, it's really hard to find them, or we have the feeling that they're not around. But that's actually not true. I mean,
No,
more
no,
and
you're
more.
right. I mean, most
Yeah.
people do care,
Yeah.
and they just don't want to hear about it, you know, and to some extent, and they don't want to really change their lifestyle. And when you tell them, you know, maybe you don't want to eat, you know, beef anymore or dairy, cheese, what, you know, you're not popular. Paul, you've been, you know,
Yeah,
dealing with
yeah,
this
I've
for a long
just
time.
been
How are you doing?
um yeah, I guess eco anxiety, is actually a fairly new term as well, fairly recent term. Um I think one of the most important things for people to be healthy emotionally and spiritually and mentally is to feel that they can have some sort of agency or ability to make changes. So I often people come to me and they say, well, what should I do? What's the best thing I can do to address climate change? And that's a very personal individual thing. I mean, we all have different skill sets, so I try to tell people, well, look at what you're best at doing, look at what you enjoy doing, and see if you can somehow apply that to something that helps the planet. Like, don't have to change, think that you have to change your entire career and what you do and who you are to help. Just and meeting with like-minded people, joining groups like Facing Future. I mean, one of the reasons we're doing what we're doing, as well as many other groups, is because we want to feel like we're doing something, even if it's just educating other people and getting messages out. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about sort of the how did you get involved in a series? I mean, you had your training, you had your practice. Did you decide that that wasn't enough and you wanted to, found or co-found, Siri? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about more about your organization.
Yeah. I think how it started for me personally is like I did a lot of work on the front lines of war, and supporting people who are in the middle of it with like nervous system regulation, and how can we continue to do the work and take care of each other with in the midst of crisis. And so that was kind of what I started with. And then my colleague and I, we would run these courses and programs together, globally. We said, what if we translate this work to the climate crisis too, and make it more specific to that? And so we created this program called Thicket that I'm running now. It's like an 8-week core online course. It's like for building climate resiliency. And and then I started to do more and more workshops, because for me, I think the individual work is can be powerful, but I think reaching more people at a time feels very important to me. So I started I'm a facilitator of the work that we connects to, Jonah Macy, who's like the root teacher of that. And it's very experiential, and reconnecting with Earth and really moving beyond who we are as an individual and finding our place again in the ecosystem that we all live in. And so I started to do that work more locally and with activist organizations and with, yeah, governmental organizations. And there was more and more people who really wanted to do this work and wanted to have retreats and workshops. And so I like to collaborate, and I didn't want to do this alone again. And so I started this organization to pull together a faculty of people who do this type of work and who have been doing this type of work, mostly in the United States, but we also have a faculty member in Australia and in Canada and from Brazil. And to collaborate with each other of like, how can we bring this work, which means basically, how can we support people on the front lines of climate change who are like, whether it's scientists, whether it's activists, like people who work so closely with this material, to give them some tools for emotional resilience with this all. And in those are in-person retreats or they're online workshops. And so that was kind of the initial idea with Siri. That's how it started. Let's all come together, share curriculum, and let's spread the word that this is actually really important. And right now what we're doing is we're developing a lot of curriculum for universities. One of the things that we're seeing is that in environmental studies or any sort of studies in the universities that study about climate change, the students oftentimes don't get emotional support. They get a lot of the information about what is not working and the science of it. And then I see them in my practice of I'm taking in all this information and I have all these feelings and I don't know where to go with that. And so one of the things that Siri is doing is right now advocating and writing a lot of courses that we try to bring to universities so the students can get some support. It's really just the idea of, can we support you a little bit with the emotional part so that you can continue to do the work, so that we can prevent the burnout that we're seeing in those fields. Actually, Paul, I loved what you were sharing earlier. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson from the All We Can Save project. She talks about this all the time. She had a TED talk on it, on how can we apply our superpower to the crisis. Like the fact that you don't have to like go out and get a new skill. Like, no, what do you feel passionate about? What brings you joy? Like, that's where we want to start. We're in this for the long haul. We want to find something that's sustainable. And in that, I think a big piece of emotional resilience is have a sense of meaning and purpose. And out of that comes more of a hopeful position, or maybe how Joanna Macy would say it, like a sense of active hope. And so ways that we can create active hope is, okay, go out into your community. Can you find people, like we just talked about, that do similar work like you, or that have similar feelings to you, so you don't feel alone in it? Can you go out in nature and find either a sit spot? It's a lovely practice to just sit outside, like under a tree, or find your favorite place in nature and just sit there for a while and start listening and using all your senses to listen to the trees, to the wind, to see really beauty around us. I think oftentimes when we're in this place of despair, what I encourage people I work with is like, can you go outside and just look around you and look at the beauty of Mother Earth? Like, look at all the colors that she creates. Look at there's something so, and it really moves us beyond more of an egocentric, me, I'm in pain, to, oh, wow, I'm part of this ecosystem. And there's something that feeling of aloneness really gets attended in those moments. Another thing I think that's really important is that we need to reframe, as you just said, Paul, like eco-anxiety and all of those new terms are coming out to describe something that's happening for people. But I think we really want to be really careful in not pathologizing any of those emotions, because these are all feelings that come up because we care, right? Like, so people feel anxious and they feel afraid because they care about this work. Like, we actually want people to feel like to feel sad, to have grief around the changes, about the extinction that we see, about all these changes that we're seeing, because that is like when we love, we grieve, and we grieve and we love, and they both come together and they activate us to find again purpose, to go out, to apply what our skills to the movement, to what needs to be done. And I think that with climate action, or with, you know, our way of showing up, I think climate anxiety can have a very motivational force, right? There's a lot of energy, especially in anger too, that we can apply to doing. We just want to be careful not to bypass any sort of feelings. I think where burnout comes in is when we only focus on doing in climate action and not acknowledge anything that's happening for us internally. That's when like outside symptoms come up, meaning
Yeah.
that, yeah.
I think maybe could you talk a little bit about maybe some of the role models for that people can look to? So, you know, specifically, you know, the very young woman who's now, you know, not a kid anymore. I mean, Greta, of course, Greta Thunberg. I mean, she started when she was what, 14, 15, you know, her protests, and she's still, you know, very active. And then on the other end of the age spectrum, a very good friend of mine by the name of Metta Spencer, an America's professor at University of Toronto. She's in her 90s. She's 92 or 94, and she does more work to try to get the message out on the climate crisis than just about anybody I know. She's got her own video channels, the End of the World video channels, and she's very active looking at solutions. And you know, she just started a Udemy course, actually, just put it online. I think it's about 6 or 8 lessons at the moment. And she's looking at expanding to Coursera, and she's looking at writing some books on the climate crisis. I mean, she's she's like not, you know, in her early to mid 90s, and she's like the Energizer bunny rabbit. She just never stops. So I think it's important to get sort of some people need to, you know, often they respond to role models, and they see what other people have been trying to do. So have you considered, you know, is your organization considering going to some online courses to get wider reach? Or are you doing it through social media channels, maybe YouTube videos, or handbooks, or maybe even a book on, I mean, there are some interesting books recently on brain function and climate change, and you know, neuropathologies and ways to stay inspired and things like that. Eco-anxiety specific books.
Yeah, there's a lot that's coming out very recently. I think the Climate Psychology Alliance US and then UK, who kind of started that whole more psychological movement, they're producing a lot of research right now. They're writing a lot of books about it. I say they because it's a big group of scholars, and but yeah, so what we're doing right now, and we're a very young organization. I mean, we just started the beginning of last year, and so right now we have an online program that we run 3 times a year. It's called Thicket, which supports people with nature connection, community connection, but also it's very contemplative based. So there's a lot of like nervous system regulation that we can do for ourselves, and also connection in regards to compassion practices. So how can we start with ourselves and feel compassionate about ourselves, and then expand that towards the world? Because my belief is that if we can expand our capacity to feel compassionate beyond ourselves, but towards our greater community, and not just our human species, but the more than human, right? That's there, then that's how we build emotional resiliency, right? The capacity to really sit with more and to take in more, and at the same time feel this deep connection to the big ecosystem that surrounds us. And then we do So we have workshop series that we offer to different organizations. People can reach us, and we can either provide that for organizations and we tailor it to organizations. We're starting to also just run them for the general public now. There's a lot of things in the works, and I think a lot of stuff is going to come out in the fall. I'm also coordinating with the Bioneers to put some of our programming on their learning platform in the beginning of next year. Yeah, and I think we have we're building up a social media presence, especially on Instagram, where it's mostly about teaching. So people can get little snippets here and there on how to focus on, we call this internal activism. So there's like the external and the internal activism, and how can we find a balance between the two of them? And that in itself creates like a sense of well-being.
More and
Yeah.
more people will be experiencing, for example, the tornadoes that have just struck across the United States. And there will be very many knock-on mental health effects from people who are not aware of the climate crisis, who didn't expect this to be happening and are suddenly in dire straits, tremendous emotional stress to that. That immediate, disaster, post-disaster is going to produce a big need for therapeutic interventions of all kinds from people.
And I think there's something to be said about peer group support too, right? Like we don't have to go and find a therapist necessarily, but there's I don't know if you're familiar with the death cafes that started in the 80s, where people were sitting around, they would meet in a cafe and have a cup of coffee and eat a cake and talk about death. And so the climate movement has taken that concept, and there are all these climate cafes, they call them, that are popping up everywhere globally now. And it can be a one-time thing for people to just jump online, and for an hour and a half, it's a space where, and it's held by facilitators. It has a very particular structure, but the intention is that people can be with other people who feel really similar feelings. And in that moment, we feel validated about how we feel, and then we can move on. It doesn't have to be, I'm committing to this work for the next 3 years. It's a drop in. And it's been very popular for a lot of people, especially for people who are like, I don't know if I want to go into like find a therapist right now and do this weekly work. Sometimes maybe I just need to drop in somewhere and be around like-minded people. And so the Climate Psychology Alliance has a wonderful, like on their website, they promote all sorts of climate cafes. And I can send you some other resources on how to find it too, because I think that's a really beautiful resource for people to know that they exist. And they're popping up locally and more in person too, in different states and cities.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about the therapist community? Like are up and coming people that are training to be therapists, are they getting any information on climate change and how to deal, specifically with that issue? Is there, are there any anonymous surveys of therapists saying that, through time, these topics are the most discussed and giving people the most anxiety in society? Like, do we have any statistics on that? Like, I would say, probably in the 70s and 80s, a lot of people would go to therapists and say, I'm worried about nuclear war, destroying the planet. And, now I would say, that might be picking up a bit more with the wars that we're seeing and threats from Russia, et cetera, on tactical nuclear bombs. But, that threat's been with us a long time. So, people don't have as much anxiety about it. And, they have more anxiety about, say, politics today. If you're in the US or Canada, they have anxiety, sort of ongoing background anxiety about the climate crisis. So, are there some training tools that are given to people as they're learning the profession, I guess?
Yeah, I would love to see a survey like this too, Paul. On the top of my head, I'm not aware if there is something like that, but I would love to get that information too. So
Yeah,
I'll
like
look,
just
I'll look out for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, like the threats do change. I mean, if you look at the insurance industry, up until a decade or two ago, fire was the biggest concern for insurance companies when they insured people's houses because fire was the most common payout. And now flood has completely dominated and taken over. Fire, is the biggest threat. The biggest threat that any homeowner around the world can face is flooding. And if you just look at the last couple of weeks of flooding in South America, in Brazil, in Kenya, even in Texas, China, Dubai a few weeks ago, and these flooding events are widespread. They displace thousands upon thousands of people, inundate homes. It takes years to recover. It is related to the wildfires because when wildfires destroy a forest, they near a community, and then there's very heavy rains. There's a lot more runoff and landslides and so on. So the threats kind of are domino like threats, cascading threats. So I specifically, but there are things that people can do, say, to make their house less at risk of flooding.
Mm-hmm.
And it also should become a big factor. If you're looking to buy a house somewhere, well, I think elevation or the elevation of the house should be one of the biggest factors that people look at, but they don't really realize or know that yet. And also many people think, oh, I'm covered if there's a flood, but they find out they're only covered for sewage backups or pipes bursting within their houses. If water comes in their front door, they're not covered, right? So there's a lot of details in the insurance policies, and most people aren't covered for overland flooding. So things like that where people can, instead of being full of anxiety about your house being flooded, well, clean your eaves trough, put in a big trench around your house. Mm-hmm. Like literally, I put in a big, massive, I excavated in my backyard. I bought somebody's flagstone driveway years ago. There's a lot of trees, so there's no, I can't grow grass or anything in the backyard. So I went on a local bartering place and ended up buying a guy's driveway, getting a crowbar and going and pulling up all these flagstones. He was tired of shoveling snow on flagstones, was his reason for switching. And I basically excavated in my backyard. I had water problems, flooding in the basement. So I removed about a foot of soil and put gravel and stone dust and then the flagstones on top, and it's perfect. It's a huge drain. It's a huge French drain. So there are actions that people can take to try to reduce some of the hazards and risks, right? And that really makes you feel good when you do things like that. Like it's a really good way of coping.
Yeah, I mean, we had
doing something real is nothing. It's nothing better than actually making something work.
Yeah.
We're coming to the end of our conversation. Is there anything else that you wanted to say that we haven't talked about, Eva?
Well, I just wanted to say, Paul, really quickly with your initial question on what's happening within the therapist community. I think it's a very new field to think about climate change, or for therapists to talk to their clients more about climate change. And a lot of universities are not teaching it yet. I think there's a movement to make that field more aware of it. But I also want to name that psychology is a very traditional field and oftentimes a very white field, right? And there's a way that I think other communities, whether especially Black and Indigenous communities, have been thinking about resiliency and survival for a very long time and have found different ways away from traditional psychology and individualized therapy to move these feelings through. And so even though, traditional psychology is trying to catch up, I think I also want to say that, I mean, these practices have been out there for a very, very long time for communities that have been struggling and facing annihilation in so many different ways for so long that, I think that it's a great place to learn from and to draw from when we talk about emotional resiliency. Yeah.
We
I
have a
meant
lot
to
to
ask
learn
you.
from cultures that did not depend on the technologies that we are using to destroy the planet. And we have to get away from all of our extractive, exploitive, and destructive consumer economy. And very many interesting, very fascinating people are rising from indigenous communities to help us in this desperate time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate you both appearing on Facing Future and
Such a
look forward
pleasure.
to seeing
Yeah.
you in the future.
Thank you, Dali. Thank you,
Yes,
Paul.
thank you.
Meet
Nice to
you.
meet you.
Yes.